Joining me now to discuss this and more, Sky News political contributor Chris Uhlmann, and I should say Brackett, bit of an energy boffin he is now. A 10% there for New South Wales. We also have, and I might add there, a target, a 70% emissions target by 2035. That will also play in. Andrew Clennell made the point yesterday, he's got the drum from the government that the 2035 target that was meant to be put out in February, buried for the election, is now set to be released in September. And Chris, that's going to make it a hell of a lot worse.
Well, as night follows day, as we've seen for so long, the higher you put these targets, the higher the energy costs goes across the board. And what we're seeing now is just the wholesale prices going up, but then there are transmission costs. We saw reports on that today, that transmission costs will rise, and of course they will, because that's 10% of your bill. It's a regulated rate of return on transmission costs, and we're going to need a whole lot more transmission lines, 5,000 kilometres between now in 2030 and $10,000 by 10,000 kilometres by 2050. That all goes onto your bill for 25 to 30 years. That's how long a regulated rate of return stays on your bill. That must go up. Distribution costs must go up. So everywhere you look across every aspect of your bill, what we see with the rise of wind and solar on any grid is the price of electricity will march up as a wholesale cost, as a retail cost, as a transmission cost, and as a distribution cost. And the last part is green schemes. That's 10% of your bill. Everything goes up.
I'll get into green schemes and the quantum that are foreign owned in a moment, but I read with interest about the creation of this new so-called think tank. It's called the Superpower Group. They want green energy, they want green iron. This is iron ore companies and others to get subsidies, but it's really, Simon Holmes a Quarter, I might add, is on the board, but this is really about not green iron, about milking the taxpayers for billions of dollars in subsidies to do all of this. We saw this happen, of course, with that boondoggle of green hydrogen. Almost everyone who was investing in that's already jumped out. Certainly the case around the world. It's the case here in Australia too. But, I mean, how many more billions do taxpayers have to pay here?
Well, billions and billions. Let's just go through the sums. And I've only had a very brief chance to look through this report, but let's add them up. So they're talking about $500 million in capital costs for each project, which would be provided by the government. They're talking about an energy subsidy for the fuel that they want to use, which of course is hydrogen, of $2 a kilogram. And they're talking about $170 in tax credit for each tonne of green steel. So by my estimation, that's $500 million for each plant. That's $280 of taxpayer input, because it's around about 55 kilograms of hydrogen you're going to need to subsidise. So $280 Australian for every tonne, every metric tonne of green steel produced. This stuff is preposterous. And by the way, to underline how preposterous it is, it says that it needs to be connected to the grid, because when there's a lull in wind or sunshine, it will need a backup. Well, guess what? What's the grid going to be running on? It's going to be running on wind and sunshine, so none of this adds up.
No, and of course we all went down the path of green hydrogen. We all said it wouldn't work, but the billions were thrown at it, proven that it doesn't work, so now we're going down the path of green iron. When that's proven not to work, there'll be some other boondoggle thrown out there. And all the while, Chris, we've got gas, which we know is lower in emissions than coal. I mean, I still like coal, but gas is lower in emissions. It's the terrific transition fuel that the rest of the world's into, but we're not into here, despite having all these reserves in the ground. Another report today, the Australian energy producers say that around the world they're putting money into gas at double the rate of investment than we're seeing here in Australia. How does that make sense?
It doesn't. And of course, that report also says that 95% of the business leaders who are involved in this industry now believe that it's harder to do business in this particular area than it was 5 years ago. That's an indictment of Australia. The other thing that's happening is because of government interference in these marketplaces. What we are seeing is that the people who've got the long offtake contracts, and that's countries like Japan and South Korea, are now nervous about sovereign risk in Australia, and they are looking elsewhere. And guess what? They can get their gas from elsewhere. So The long run effect of this is that we may well lose that export income that we get from liquefied natural gas, which is the third biggest source of export income that we have. And of course, people want to get rid of our coal exports, which is the second biggest source of income that we have. And there's a circle drawn around iron ore at the moment as well, which is the first biggest source of export income we have. We're not going to be a green energy superpower. We are an energy superpower. We are going to be no kind of power at all in the future.
And of course, the rest of the world are waking up to this. You know, New Zealand, Thursday and Friday made an announcement that they've since followed up. They're very determined to junk net zero. They're going heavily into gas exploration, gas mining. Here in Australia, we're shutting up shop. We've got lawfare shutting down gas projects, not opening up those projects. I can't see how the coalition, you know, it won't happen right now. Right now, they're fighting about nuclear. But when these 2035 targets come out and they're due in September, says Andrew Clennell, and they will include for the first time really heavy cuts into agriculture, I can't see how the coalition's going to avoid a debate about whether or not they should throw away the Scott Morrison pledge on net zero. I mean, this is the looming fight of 2025.
But it's as simple as this, Peter, and you pointed out across the Tasman, and I know that we've been through these figures before, but let's go through them again. We know the United States is not doing net zero because Donald Trump has pulled out of the Paris Accord and his catch cry is drill, baby, drill. So no net zero there. China has never been signed up to net zero. It burns 58% of the world's coal. Russia treats these targets as a joke. India does not abide by the targets that have been set and has no intention of reaching net zero. So that's 60% of the world's emissions. What does Australia think it's doing? It's one of the few countries on Earth that is actually signed up to this target. And even now, people who are pushing for big change when it comes to trying to do something about climate, like the Tony Blair Institute for Global Affairs, and like the guy that used to advise John Kerry, are saying that none of these targets are actually achievable and we have to think about doing something else. This shouldn't be a hard argument to make. I don't know why the Liberal Party has made such a meal of it.
I don't know either. And of course, on Friday, you've got Donald Trump. You mentioned him just a moment ago. We mentioned Donald Trump and the executive orders he signed. This is about accelerating nuclear. They include an overhaul of the nuclear regulator in the United States. They want to fast track new nuclear licenses. They want to boost domestic fuel supplies. Dear old Jim Molan argued for that for many years here in Australia. And they want the ability to use federal land to put reactors on that land to benefit both the military or, and this is really important, large data centres for AI. I mean, you can say what you like about Donald Trump, but they are all very practical initiatives that the states and the rest of the world, I have to say, are adopting in some more small measure. But here in Australia, we still have a prohibition, despite the fact that it's our uranium that's being dug up and shipped around the world.
And despite the fact that we want nuclear submarines, so we clearly have no problem with having our sailors locked up next to large nuclear reactors for months at a time. Oh, look, Peter, look around the world. It's bipartisan, by the way, in the United States on nuclear energy. I was there last year and the Democrat Energy Secretary was talking about needing 198 more nuclear reactors in the United States by 2050. China is building 150 of them. Microsoft has restarted the 3 Mile Island reactor because it wants to build a huge data centre. You know, the only way I can think about this is we are blessed here in Australia, Peter, because Chris Bowen and the rest of the energy ministers in Australia are way smarter than Microsoft and Google and the Chinese government and the United States administration and the UK and France. So we are blessed by the fact that we have people who are so much smarter than the rest of the world, and we should be grateful for it.
Yeah, so blessed as we are with the brilliance of Chris Bowen, we're still dealing with 50,000 people that came in illegal under his watch that are still here in Australia. That's how smart the bloke is. I'll leave it there, Chris.